world is run on a lot of secrets. If you're precognitive, you could also get information about things you're not supposed to know about. Our intelligence agencies have continued to work with remote viewers. Remote viewers are gifted enough to get that classified information without clearance. We do experiments in the lab to show that statistically significantly over and over again, you could show precognition is a real effect. It's really hard to say that any particular case wasn't just a coincidence.
Dr. Julia Mossbridge. She is the human potential research lead for the telepathy tapes. She's a cognitive neuroscientist. She studies exceptional human performance, including side effects, precognition, presentiment.
I have trained people to be excellent precognitive remote viewers who did not believe in it at all. There were thousands of premonitions about 9/11 that are really compelling. Some of them saved their life.
How do you teach someone to be a remote viewer? Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
I'm Jonathan Cohen.
Welcome to our breakdown.
Let's explore time.
What is time?
This conversation was fascinating because our guest today is going to explain the future is actually sending information back to us.
Can we all see the future? If you've ever thought about a dream you had, a feeling you had, and then you felt like it came true, components of it came true, our guest today literally scientifically studies information from what we perceive as the future, as well as information from our perceived past, and how they can all coalesce and make up a variety of phenomena that in many cases we just haven't been trained to tap into.
Julia is also going to describe to us a very specific practice of how each of us can increase our ability to remember our dreams. She describes how self-compassion for your past self and your future self can actually increase your intuitive ability. She explains precognitive awareness, where you can have dreams and visions of the future.
And in case you're wondering where a conversation about seeing the future could go, yes, it goes there. It goes into, if people can remote view into the future, can they predict tragedies from happening? She's going to share her own personal experience of foreseeing tragedies that literally occurred. She talks about the different tools that we can use to try and firm up our belief in understanding what is happening in places other than where our physical body is and in places other than where our timestamp is. We talk about how the government has used these tools, how CIA agencies continue to use these tools, and while those things can be used for nefarious reasons, there's also a way to utilize these things from a really mind-blowing, mystical, and transcendental perspective of, are we on, as she calls it, the wrong side of the quilt when we examine our existence?
And very practically speaking, when we talk about these mystical abilities and intuition and seeing into the future, can we use these to guide our own lives? To find a better relationship, to find a job that more aptly fits our skill set, that will likely make us happier? And how do we navigate the world through more intuitive senses?
Who can answer all of these questions and more? Dr. Julia Mossbridge. She's a cognitive neuroscientist, and she studies exceptional human performance, including side effects, precognition, presentiment. She's a senior distinguished fellow in human potential at the Center for the Future Mind at Florida Atlantic University. And she is the human potential research lead for the telepathy tapes. So she is literally part of the team that is researching, is there a way to quantify, once we've qualified, how do we quantify special abilities? And as Dr. Mossbridge is going to talk about, she doesn't even think of these things as special abilities. She thinks of them as abilities that we all are born with. We just haven't been taught how to listen to and how to refine.
And if this doesn't seem like enough to capture your interest, stick around to the end of the conversation where Julia describes what happens when we die.
It's such a pleasure to welcome to the breakdown Dr. Julia Mossbridge.
Break it down.
maybe you can start by defining for us precognition and how that's distinguished from premonition, or if you use them interchangeably.
So precognition is the scientific-ish term for receiving information about a future event through means that are other than normal sensory means or actually causing the event, right? So some examples of what precognition is not. Precognition is not having a dream about buying a new rug that's purple and then going to the store and getting a new rug that's purple and being like, oh my gosh, I precognized this. And like, well, also you could have caused that because you had that dream, remember? So that's one. Another thing precognition is not is dealing with unconscious information that you then infer from. So like, oh, it's Thursday. I woke up and I just had this feeling my mom would call. Well, you haven't noticed that your mom calls every Thursday, but she does. So you're not precognizing it. You're actually using unconscious information, like everyone does, to try to predict future events. That's not the same thing. And then the other thing that it's not is getting information about a future event and having to be conscious of it or non-conscious. Let me say this another way. Precognition can be conscious or unconscious. In other words, you can get information about a future event and you don't know you're getting it, but you use that information. Like today, I'm just going to run and I'm going to go for this run on this particular route. And it just so happens that your route avoided a tree that fell and killed another runner or something like that. That could still be precognition in the sense that you may have gotten information about the future. It could have just been coincidence, but it could be precognition. You got the information about the future. You avoided that place, but you weren't conscious of it. So in other words, I guess what I'm saying is precognition does not have to be conscious. In fact, it's often unconscious. Premonition is usually associated with negative events. Very few people will say, I had a premonition that I'm going to win the lottery, right? I have a premonition I'm going to win the lottery. Some people will. Usually, premonition comes from the term before, and moner, the root words, which means to warn. So it's really associated with something that you're being warned about, so something negative. So that's one difference, whereas precognition is neutral in the valence. But also, premonition is a folk term. It's less of a scientific term. So it's very hard to study premonitions because they're by definition spontaneous. They just occur. I had this premonition, it occurred to me in my sleep. It occurred to me upon waking. It occurred to me as I was falling asleep. It occurred to me when I was doing dishes. They just occur, and they're necessarily conscious, whereas precognition is a name for all of the things, including premonitions. It's an umbrella term for this information that comes either consciously or unconsciously in ways that are not normal sensory means, not normal memory means, and not through unconscious or conscious inference, and not through being caused. And so that's the relationship. So precognition is the scientific umbrella term. Premonition is one of the sort of items under the umbrella. Prophecy is another item under the umbrella.
I wonder if we could just step back for a second and set the table for this conversation. You're a scientist, and you believe in things that the lay person may have heard about but doesn't fully understand. And some of those things, if I'm okay to paraphrase here, is that the future is knowable, that the amount of senses that we have, our general senses, could be expanded upon. What else do you believe in sort of the simplest terms that the layperson may be very curious about or not fully understand?
I'm trying to get out of my academic mind because my academic mind wants to fight with this idea that the future is knowable, because I'm not sure I believe that entirely. I'm not sure I believe entirely that our senses can be expanded, because you could call this kind of sense that I'm talking about, with which people sense the future, you could call it one of our existing senses that we just don't well understand. So let me go to an even higher level and say, my basic understanding, and it's hardly a belief, it's really based on fact, is that we don't understand how time works, and that we think we do. And that's how I would set the table for this conversation, is that we don't understand how time works. By we, I mean like everyone on the planet. No one understands how time works. And we think we do, meaning everyone on the planet has their opinion about how time works. And oftentimes it's this idea that the future is this vast unknowable space. The past you can't go back to or really see anymore. It's gone. Each moment it's gone, it's gone, it's gone. Every time we're in a new now, it's gone. And that you can't affect the past from the future. Those are things that many people in the world believe to be true about time, but we don't really know. And there's lots of indications in physics and in psychology and neuroscience that we really, really don't know. And there's a lot of wiggle room in all of those things I just said that we think we know. That's how I would set the table.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Calm.
Ever feel like your mind is running in a dozen directions at once? When your thoughts are scattered, even the smallest decisions can feel overwhelming. But just 5 minutes a day with Calm can help you slow down, clear your head, and make choices with more confidence. Calm helps me with the big three: anxiety, stress, and sleep. Their meditations help me untangle the day's chaos in my brain, and breath has a direct link to anxiety. I feel more at ease and in my body after easy and helpful breathing exercises. Calm's the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Everyone faces unique challenges in their daily lives. That's why Calm offers a wide range of content and programs to help you navigate life's ups and downs, including guided meditations to help you work through anxiety and stress, boost your focus, build healthier habits, and take better care of your physical well-being. Sleep stories, sleep meditations, and calming music to help you drift off to restful sleep quickly and naturally, grounding exercises to help you reset and relax when you're feeling overwhelmed, expert-led talks to help you handle grief, improve self-esteem, improve relationships, and more. The Calm app puts the tools you need right in your pocket, so stress and anxiety relief is always within reach. Calm has over 2 million 5-star reviews and can help you stress less, sleep more, and live better. Calm has an exclusive offer just for listeners of our show. Get 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/break. This is an amazing value. Go to calm.com/break for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. calm.com/break.
Tell Calm you heard about them from us. Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Element.
Element helps all of us stay hydrated without sugar and dodgy ingredients that are found in so many popular electrolyte and sports drinks. Electrolyte deficiency or imbalance can cause so many things you may not have realized was caused by that: headaches, cramps, fatigue, brain fog, weakness. Element is a zero-sugar electrolyte drink mix born from the growing body of research revealing that optimal health outcomes occur at sodium levels 2 to 3 times government recommendations. Each stick pack delivers a meaningful dose of electrolytes with no sugar, artificial colors, no dodgy ingredients. Element's formulated for anyone on a mission to restore health through hydration. It's perfectly suited for athletes, folks who are fasting, those following keto, low-carb, whole food, or paleo diets. From health experts, everyone from famed Stanford neuroscientists to functional nutritionists to moms, exercise enthusiasts, heavy sweaters, sauna sitters, those who want a dynamite no-sugar margarita or mocktail, all those types incorporate Element into their daily routine. Summer activities like hiking, beach days, or workouts in the summer can really drain your electrolytes. I can feel the electrolyte loss in my body. I feel more fatigue, muscle cramps, headaches. Element is a quick and easy way to alleviate these symptoms by adding electrolytes right into your body. Squeeze the most out of summer with Element's new limited-time lemonade salt. Salty, tart, and refreshing brings you the best of summer wherever you are. Get yours while supplies last. Get a free 8-count sample pack of Element's most popular drink mix flavors with any purchase at drinkelement.com/Mayim. Find your favorite Element flavor or share with a friend. The 8-count consists of 2 citrus salt, 2 watermelon salt, 2 orange salt, 2 raspberry salt. Try Element totally risk-free. If you don't like it, we'll refund your order. No questions asked. Again, for your free Element sample pack, go to drinkelement.com/MAYIM. That's drinkelement.com/Mayim. Can anyone learn how to use their bodies as a tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you could learn anything, if you're a person who has the capacity to learn, and some people, don't, because they're stuck with bodies that can't learn things. Most people can.
What does it mean to use your body as a tool here?
Well, if physical reality is not primary, so I include in physical reality like electromagnetic waves, all the stuff we were just talking about in the Minkowski space-time block world thing. if physical reality is not primary, if what's primary comes underneath that, and by underneath that I mean is supportive to physical reality, kind of provides the blueprint for physical reality, but isn't the same as physical reality, then the thing that's supporting it is sort of, can be called consciousness with a capital C, can be called information, like an informational substrate. Sometimes I call it pervasive universal consciousness. Sometimes you could think of it as the breath of God. It has been called that, or Tzimtzum, the contraction of God, so that physical things can exist. But it comes first. It's foundational. It's the root of matter. It's the root of the physical things. So therefore, the body is growing up out of that. Like the body is the tree that comes out of the seed. And so then what good is the tree? If the purpose of the seed is to create the tree, what good is the tree? Well, the tree ends up producing more seeds. But also, the tree has all these other purposes. It interacts with the wind, right? It interacts with the soil. It changes the world just by existing, even if it doesn't have any acorns. I'm thinking of an oak tree here, but whatever, it's my favorite kind of tree. But even if it doesn't have any seeds that it produces, right? So it's a tool of this informational substrate, or the pervasive universal consciousness, or the breath of God. It's a tool to make change.
And in this metaphor, when you're talking about a universal consciousness, I think back to our conversation with Thomas Campbell, who talks about the larger consciousness system. My understanding of it is that you're trying to access more information outside of your ego to have more grace, have more synchronicity, have more opportunity. How do you imagine it?
I imagine it that it goes in developmental stages. So if you read about like the process of psychological self-development, like in self-psychology, or it used to be called ego development, although they changed that because it wasn't really about the ego as much as everything, the whole psyche. I think at first you can get into it because you're like, ooh, I'm going to have more opportunities. I'm going to more go with the flow. It's going to bring me more joy. Maybe I'll find a partner. These things that we want. In Kabbalistic mysticism, there's talk about the lesser hara and the greater hara. Hara is like energy. And the lesser hara are things that you need. You need the energy that says, I want to find a partner. I want to build a house. I want to do well in my career. Because in order to survive and really get to the next, to use the greater hara, you need those things. The greater hara is about self-transcendence. And I think that's sort of what happens is people get hooked onto the lesser hara. Like, ooh, if I do this, I'm going to help my career. And you probably will help your career. And then you get to this point of, oh, it feels really good to me to let go of these sort of immediate, my individual life needs, and realize that I can use this as a tool to support my community, to support the world, to join in something that's larger than me and let that energy and information flow through me, and to access what I would call the unconditional universal love as an energy that feeds this self-transcendence, or the actions that are self-transcendent. How can I help make the world a better place? And it will, of course, that will also have an impact on your family and on your house and on your career. Sometimes the impact is negative, sometimes it's positive. But there's this, Abraham Maslow talked about the hierarchy of needs, and just before he died in 1969, he wrote about the need that he forgot to list, which is the need for self-transcendence, to join in something larger than ourselves that's positive, moves towards a goal that is beyond ourselves. And it's not just a need, it's a very active force that can reach down to anyone who's even struggling with the, having enough food or feeling safe in their environment, can reach down in that hierarchy of needs and pull them up. So it has a special status. It's both a need and an active force. And so that's how I think it works.
You talk in this book about the sort of conditions that need to be in place for someone to be open to, let's say, precognition, right? To be open to having these experiences. And you list three things that are needed. And one is an openness to experience. The second is extroversion. And the third is belief in precognition. So can you talk a little bit about the conditions of who are the people who are more likely to be able to tap into this? And what is it like to develop these aspects of you if these are the things that are needed?
Okay, yeah, and just some clarification. That result about openness to experience, extroversion, and belief was a scientific result that came from multiple studies of people reporting.
The study is basically like, who the heck are the kind of people who think that their dreams are coming true?
Right, exactly.
What do they have in common?
Right. And so there's some studies where they actually test people's precognitive ability and they rank them according to those things. So this does not mean that if you're not extroverted, like I'm an introvert, this does not mean if you're not extroverted, you can't do precognition. It doesn't mean if you don't believe it, you can't do it. And it doesn't mean if you're not open to experience, you can't do it. It just means that on average, those are the folks who either say, which the extroversion thing, like, of course, right? Either say, sorry, introvert joke, but say or actually are that they experience precognition or actually are precognitive. So, and I did a study with, I think, several thousand respondents. I forget the number. And looked at their actual skill at precognition. And this was actually after that book was published. And correlated it with those same kind of traits, the big five, ocean. And found a similar correlation with openness, maybe with extroversion, artisticness, but it was complicated. It wasn't simple. On some tasks it was one thing, and some tasks it was another. And I don't know what to think of it. And so I'm just going to back up and say what I think you really need to be good at precognition is openness. I think that's really real. Just like anything that if you want to learn something, if you're not open to learning it, like good luck. So openness, the capacity to learn new things, and some kind of interest that drives you. Some kind of interest that drives you, and that could be disbelief. I have trained people to be excellent precognitive remote viewers who did not believe in it at all. In fact, sometimes it works best because they're like, this doesn't work. And I'm like, great. Do you want to be in the class or not? And if they say yes, I'm like, great. We'll just go through the motions and see what happens. There's a strong feeling about it, and they want to be in the class to prove themselves right. Now, what can happen is they prove themselves wrong, but then they've flipped. But all there needs to be is a strong motivation one way or another. And so it doesn't, I don't think, even need to be belief. In fact, I've done experiments where people who don't believe in precognition show the effect, but they show it in the reverse direction of those who do believe in precognition. It's still statistically significant. They're just doing the opposite thing, psychically.
How do you teach someone to be a remote viewer?
It's the easiest thing, and I
know. Oh, great! Let's just do it right now.
We can. The thing is, people do it differently. So I will say, like, my way of teaching is based on my background doing my PhD at Northwestern and teaching people to differentiate tones that were really obscure and very difficult to differentiate. And the way we taught them is we didn't tell them anything psychological or informational. We just said, listen to these two tones and we're going to tell you, you tell us whether you think they're different and we'll tell you if you're right. And they practiced for about half an hour a day. And after about 5 days, they could differentiate these tones because their own feedback mechanisms trained them. So really, it was practice. So what I believe is the way you learn anything is practice, especially perceptual things like remote viewing. But you can go to many, many remote viewing teachers who will train you in all sorts of different ways, the kind the military used, et cetera, et cetera. And what I do is I take people who have already been trained in that way or people who are completely new, and I say, we're going to try to predict this future event. I give them the website at the Premonition code where they can go get, future pictures that are randomly selected for free. And I just have them try to predict it in different ways. And the only thing I add to it is I ask them to use unconditional love for themselves in the training process and for the target. The target is whatever you're looking at in the future. And that really changes people in a positive way. They start.
Hold on, Julia. What's love got to do with it?
Yes. Well, I started doing that for two reasons. One is, on the flip side, with my nonprofit, I had developed an app to help people deal with trauma by connecting with different versions of themselves in time. So what we call time travel therapy.
Everyone wants to know what time travel therapy is.
Time travel therapy is the best named therapy because it sounds really fun, and frankly, it is, and it's not that much hard work. So time travel therapy is so first you acknowledge everyone, not just crazy people, but everyone has an internal model of themselves at earlier times in their lives. Like if you close your eyes and you're asked to think of yourself when you were 12, you can conjure that up.
I was in a movie. You can also watch it on a screen. It's kind of weird. But go ahead. Sorry. So everybody, you can close your eyes.
Imagine that those versions of yourself still kind of exist and you can talk to them and you could connect with them.
This is the basis of inner child work. It's the basis
same.
of internal family systems.
Exactly. So now also notice that you have versions of yourself in the future. Like you imagine, if I took this job, that's what it would look like. What is it going to be like on my deathbed? If I'm with that person, what that would look like. You have those models too. Those are anticipatory models. They're important parts of our brain trying to model the future.
But future me is very different than past me.
That's what we think.
Well, I mean, what I can say is I have a knowing, if we want to use that word, I have a knowing of the emotional existence of me at 12, in the sense that the way that I frame my timeline is that existed, and we all have pictures and, images and experiences that form that. Whereas when I think of future me, like if I have to live with Jonathan for 5 more minutes, I could either be super happy about it or I could be super mad about it. Both of those exist. I got a lot more possibility in the future than I do in the past, meaning there is one distinct me at 12, right, that I conjure, and there's infinite me's in the future.
Well, but the thing is, but that's not true.
Yeah, is it true that there's only one version of you in the past?
No, it's just the one you conjure who was in Beaches. So there's actually infinite past versions. And if there are infinite future versions, then by definition, there are infinite past versions because all we have is what we're calling the present. So this is the cool thing. So you can actually learn something about your past self by doing these kind of exercises. So a mental time travel therapy exercise. So the way I came across it is when I was a kid, I was in this really dysfunctional family that was also full of like super interesting people, unconditional love, abuse that wasn't acknowledged as abuse, weird neglect, and fun. I mean, a weird mix of those things. I'm not going to go into detail on abuse, but there was this nightly ritual that was abusive. And what I did was I saw in this rocking chair near my bed this woman who was in her 50s. She had brown hair. She was rocking in the rocking chair. And she would say to me, "It's okay to be angry. This doesn't make sense. This isn't your fault. And by the way, you're going to thrive someday." She would say it over and over again. That was like the mantra. And only when I was in therapy in my 40s did my therapist have me go be with my earlier self during this abuse. And she's like, "What would you say?" And I go, "I know just what I would say. I would say, it's okay to be angry. This doesn't make any sense. This is a bad situation, but someday you're going to thrive someday." And that's when I realized, oh, this is a loop. I was seeing myself and then I created it. The funny thing about all of this is I don't actually know if I created that when I was a child or if I created that memory as an adult of me being a child and seeing that woman in my mind's eye. I don't know, and I don't care, because the whole circle is healing. So I don't care about the ontological reality. In an experiment, I would, but in my own history and my own psyche, I don't care about whether I actually as a child saw that woman or if I placed that memory in the past, because now I see it as this healing loop that helped save me. And so that's why I created Time Machine. I created this institute called the Institute for Love and Time. We work on unconditional love and weaving that through time because it's healing. And I created Time Machine because I went and I looked in the psychological literature and I saw there's this thing. It's called backwards time travel. It's called time travel therapy. It's called time travel narratives. People are giving it different names. But this is a thing that people do. They call it eternal family systems through time. And it works. And I wanted to turn it into an app so that everyone could experience it without having a therapist. And so we made Time Machine, and I realized there's something about my work with the precognition and the precognitive remote viewing and studying the science of precognition. And there's something about this healing modality that we're saying the same things, that there's this relationship between unconditional love, learning to unconditionally love yourself both in the past and then in the future, and how healing that is. We actually showed it mathematically, the causal efficacy of unconditional love, and developing this time perspective on overall well-being. There's something related about how healing that is and your ability to accept that you can receive information from the future. It's almost like once you realize that you will love yourself no matter what, and you can be loved no matter what, some of the barriers drop, and now you have you have fewer opinions about this information that's coming in. You're less judgmental about it, but you're also less attached to it. So if you're wrong, you're wrong, and you still love yourself. If you're right, you're right, and you still love yourself. And so you get into this much more useful place for the world because it's not about your own ego. And it's about collaborating with others, because if you have a team of people who are trained to do this, maybe one of them will be right and it'll rub off on the others, And so it's more about figuring out how to navigate time helpfully with love than it is about how can I get my life to work out in the best possible way. And the reason that leads to this spiritual path is you recognize, what do I even think is the best possible way? Like, my opinion of the best possible way of my life working out at any particular time is often, when I look back, perhaps not the best possible way. And so that's one of the things you learn as you start to do this is, wait a minute, as I start to chat with my future selves and my past selves just in my own mind, they're all imaginary chats, but I'm learning something real, which is, sometimes my opinion about what should happen is not the highest good.
I mean, I think that's very relatable. Often our limited perspective, we think, oh, if I stay in this job and get the promotion, that's what I want. But maybe it's leaving that job and going and something else opening up and having an entirely new career, which will be something much more fulfilling for someone.
100%. Yeah, it happens all the time.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Defender.
Jonathan, are you a trailblazer?
You bet I am.
A risk taker?
All the risks.
Someone with countless tales of epic adventure?
Not yet, but I want to have them.
That's right. Well, even the boldest among us start off small, daring themselves to reach greater goals each day. If you're looking to take on a challenge like that, guess what? The Defender is too. It's a vehicle built for drivers capable of great things, whether they're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend getaway, or for Jonathan, just down the block to pick up the mail. Defender was engineered to meet challenges head on so you can explore with confidence. An icon reimagined through modern design, fit for a new generation of explorers. Adventure seekers won't want to miss Destination Defender. That's an epic weekend festival designed for Defender owners and enthusiasts. You can all get together. It takes place in Port Jervis, New York from May 16th through 18th. It's an unforgettable weekend with inspiring talks, off-road driving courses, chef tastings, live music. To learn more, go to DestinationDefenderUSA.com. A vehicle built for the modern explorer, the Defender is a vehicle built for extremes and has the endurance to take you further. Drive with on-road presence and off-road prowess in a vehicle that looks tough because it is tough. The Defender boasts an exterior designed for optimum durability. Its raised hood and sculpted grille give the Defender 110 a modern edge. Defender 110 has 5 seats, option of 7. Capability meets comfort in the Defender 110 with luxury appointments and rich materials to ensure comfortable adventures. There's 3D surround cameras with clear sight so you can see under the vehicle. There's clear sight rear view that offers unobstructed rear view even when you can't see through the back window. Driver aid technology make driving and parking simpler. And next generation Pivi Pro infotainment makes more of your world. Intuitive driver displays are also customizable to your journey. Design your Defender 110 at LandRoverUSA.com. Visit LandRoverUSA.com to learn more about the Defender 110.
Explore the Defender 110 at LandRoverUSA.com. Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Remy.
If you've listened to our podcast for any amount of time, you've heard Jonathan and I both talk about issues with teeth clenching, grinding, like that soreness right here, sometimes a headache. Our jaws are tired and it's not good for teeth. It's just not a fun problem to deal with. But if you're part of the 30% of Americans who grind their teeth, your smile deserves protection, and there is no better solution than Remy's custom fit night guard. Both dentists and teeth grinders recommend Remy because a custom fit night guard is the best way to protect your teeth, and Remy is 80% less than the dentist and so much easier. So here's how it works. You get your kit right to your door. So already you don't have to go to the dentist. You get step-by-step instructions, which were actually kind of fun to follow. You get a perfect impression. They ship you a custom fit night guard made in the USA in Las Vegas. Woo, party. And you get your night guard back. Here, I'm literally holding it. And it's literally as if I've been to the dentist, but I didn't have to go to the dentist. It's the greatest thing. I won't put it in now because I talk kind of funny. The best part is Remy is so confident you'll get a perfect fit. They offer a 45-night perfect fit guarantee or your money back. No waiting rooms, no overpriced bills, just a better way to protect your teeth while you sleep. Try Remy risk-free at shopremy.com/break. Use code BREAK to get up to 50% off your night guard at checkout. That's 50% off at shopremi.com/break with code BREAK.
Thank you, Remy, for sponsoring this episode. What was the math that you said proved the power of love in self-compassion in this way?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I get excited and I use the word prove, but that's not a real scientific term. And I always find it irritating when people say that.
Evidence for, maybe more accurate?
We have some evidence for that. And so that came from our paper, our team's paper. It was sponsored by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, which is a health and equity foundation in the U.S. And that work, we took 97 people who were willing to participate in the study. It was like a 26-day study, pilot study of the technology time machine. And we had them go through just 5 days of leaving messages for themselves. And then the next day they would get the message. So it was like just talking to yourself a little bit over time with love. And they would also sometimes read an inspirational quote. And we were just looking at their self-report of their overall well-being before and after and during this process. And so overall well-being as a self-report is really interesting because people who have been trained in sort of observational science or science that tries to figure out what's going on inside a person by looking at what they say about what's going on inside them also know that a better thing is to have some kind of other measure, right? So they say they're feeling good, but like, can we really trust that? What we did to sort of prove that our measure of overall well-being was important and made it wasn't just people just blowing smoke up our asses was we put people into two groups. Whether they had early childhood trauma, we had them complete the survey of early childhood trauma ACEs survey. Whether they had severe early childhood trauma or just mild to moderate early childhood trauma. No one had no early childhood trauma, predictably. And what we saw when you looked at the overall well-being of people walking in the door of that study before they did anything, it was statistically significantly the case that people who had severe early childhood trauma had worse overall well-being, and people who had less severe had statistically significantly better overall well-being. That convinced us that our measure was good because it's not like they were talking to each other about what did you put on the overall well-being scale and what was your early childhood trauma. It just fell out that way. And we know that people who have more severe early childhood trauma are more likely to have worse overall well-being on any particular day. So over the course of the 26 days, this is my favorite result of the study, the folks who had worse trauma caught up to the folks who had little to no trauma. And the folks who had little to moderate or little to no trauma also improved statistically significant in their overall well-being. But now they look like the same group, like literally the same mean overall well-being. So that's an impressive result because it's hard to move this population. It's hard to move them to they literally improved twice as much in overall well-being as compared to the ones who didn't have as much trauma. Why do I bring that up in this context? Because we were asking also what their experience of unconditional love for themselves and others was through the 26 days. And we were also asking about what their sense of time perspective was, which is this measure of how you look at the past, how you look at the future, and how you look at the now. A balanced time perspective is looking at the past with real positivity. It doesn't mean glossing over things that happened, but being able to tell a story that's redemptive about whatever happened. A balanced time perspective in the future is being able to have reasonable plans that make sense, that aren't based on like winning the lottery. And a balanced time perspective of the now is just to feel like hopeful and positive in the now. So a balanced time perspective across all of those is a really good indicator of life satisfaction and career outcomes, education and health outcomes. So balanced time perspective and unconditional love were two different causal influences on on the change of overall well-being over the course of the study. But the unconditional love we could show using mediation analysis was actually, so you could say mathematically causal to the improvement in overall well-being. And that followed up on a previous study by some other folks that showed that self-transcendence, unconditional love as a form of self-transcendence, is causal to overall well-being improvement. So this idea that there's actually self-transcendence, one big piece of self-transcendence is unconditional love, can lift you up beyond where you're expected to be.
Which is very consistent with, what a lot of the sort of mainstream and, like what's sort of entered the cultural consciousness in terms of manifesting. I'm not saying they're the same, but it's not a coincidence. Like for anyone out there who's like, oh, that sounds a little bit like, it's not a coincidence that this is what Bruce Lipton talks about. This is what Joe Dispenza, what Tony Robbins have made careers built on.
Well, and Valerie Carr.
Yep. And also what many neural retraining programs are training you to do, biofeedback techniques like heart math, right? It's training you to sustain an elevated feeling of positivity because it is in that state that it seems I think one day we'll be able to see more, more accurately that different cellular processes are functioning. We're getting immune systems coming online that otherwise weren't. And with sustained practice and with consistent practice, what you're doing is, manifesting is not just like making a pretty vision board. It's creating the neurochemical milieu in which healing can occur.
And how is it doing that? I think it's doing that, and this is where Tom Campbell and I are in a total agreement. It's doing that through affecting the big C consciousness, the informational substrate. It's going in this loop. So it's pulling you up, self-transcendence, into the foundation.
I like that visual, which is, kind of consistent with like that Tsum concept also, right? That contraction that is needed for expansion. I wonder if we can get a little more specific. You mentioned you mentioned a lottery ticket, and I can't help but go there because one of the things that you talk about being able to utilize precognition for is things like predicting stock market trends. If you are someone who either believes in psychic abilities or is looking to develop them, learning these kinds of tools kind of adds to whatever tool base you might be having. It also sort of redefines the notion of what it is to be a psychic. And you also talk about these techniques can be used to help you find a better career path. And by better, I mean better for you and for your heart's desire. There is an example, though, in the book of someone who dreamt the correct lottery numbers. It's a 1 in 278,256 chance His name was Victor Amol. Is that how you pronounce it?
And he was I believe it was a software engineer.
And he correctly dreamt a series of lottery numbers. I think he won $10,000. There's some examples in your book, of people, and also I want you to give a little bit of a framework for what you talk about when you talk about the confirmation of precognitive information that comes in dreams. So the notion is not kind of the example you gave earlier. I dreamt about a purple rug. I went to Target and there's a purple rug. Like, I dreamt it, right? And my mother right now, when she listens to this episode, is literally going to vibrate out of her chair and possibly levitate, because my mother has a series of precognitive experiences that I don't know if they would hold up to your confirmation. But, some of the requirements for precognition are that there be 2 or more correspondences between the precognition and the event happening that makes you say, I had a precognitive experience of this. Can you describe what correspondences are?
Actually, the purple rug example would be 2 correspondences. The color purple and the rug.
I got that right.
Yeah, you got that right.
Explain what correspondences are.
If you listed out all the adjectives and all the verbs in your dream, like running, clumsily, yellow, and then, I guess the nouns, stop sign, and that you had a dream about clumsily running towards a yellow stop sign. If you listed those out, and then the next day you were clumsily running away from a yellow garbage truck, that's interesting, but you could also have caused that. If you saw a video randomly, if a friend sent you a video of them running clumsily away from a red stop sign, that's enough, right? Because you can't control that.
Because there's running,
yes,
clumsily, stop sign.
Stop sign, even though it wasn't yellow.
So it's the wrong color, but we're at 3.
You were at 3, yeah. And you couldn't control it. It's not like you did the thing.
Got it. So if you have a dream that you're running clumsily and then the next day you run clumsily somewhere, that could be an not very unconscious, system at work. But if you saw someone else running clumsily, you saw a video, something you had no control over and it happened. We're looking for 2 of those things, and we need a short delay of less than 2 weeks from the precognition to the event.
Okay, to be clear, that's a little bit harsh. Some people actually have dreams that come true a year later, and I know one woman who keeps a very, very intense time dream journal, and things come true for her on like monthly and yearly cycles on that day. So what I was really trying to do with that, I did write that section of the book. Teresa Chung and I were co-authors, and she would write runs. And so I wrote that section, and what I was really trying to do is to reduce the number of emails I would get from people who said, who said, I think I'm this amazing precognitive dreamer. Britney Spears had a fireworks show at, halftime, and the night before I dreamt that she was going to have a fireworks show. I'm like, no. Yeah. And so, or 3 years before, I dreamt there was a plane crash of nondescript variety, and then there was this plane crash 3 years later, and I dreamt it. And it's like, no. I would buy it so some people have had plane crash dreams where it's like, here's the number of the flight.
Elizabeth Crone, who we had on the podcast, she literally saw the number of people killed to accuracy several times, and the flight name, it's insane, and also where it landed. Yeah.
Yes. And so you have to sort of know a little bit about statistical likelihood yourself. And so I was trying to give people a shortcut and to say,
got it. Okay, that's helpful. You said that if there's a longer delay, longer than 2 weeks, we need more correspondences in theory.
Yeah, because there's just a statistical likelihood of more things happening.
Of course. So, and there has to be no way of predicting or causing the event yourself, which we talked about. I also like that you said you get extra credit if you record the experience before the event to prevent false memory, which we did an episode with Dr. Amir Raz, who's a fantastical neuroscientist and a friend of mine. And he's got a whole thing about false memory that makes you wonder if anyone knows or remembers anything. If you want me to think about my past life or future life, I may not have any accurate memory of anything at all.
And what's your current perception of it is what you're working with.
My current perception is I'm talking to you right now. And if these are the conditions for precognitive confirmation, the man dreaming the lottery numbers, I'm just going to be honest, I don't know how to explain that. Like in a material fashion, to say that a 1 in 278,258 chance of guessing those correct numbers, like, that's mind-blowing. There's also an example of a doctor who dreamt something with 6 correspondences that were accurate. She recorded her dreams for 50 years. This one she didn't get extra credit for. This is the dream, right? She opened a newspaper. On page 5, there was a story that 5 train cars had fallen off the track at 5th Street and Wyoming Avenue in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The next morning, ready for it, Valerie? You ready to get chills? She opened the paper, and on page 5 was the story. Literally, page 5, trains, 5 train cars fell off the track, 5th Avenue, Wyoming Avenue, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I cannot explain this.
I can explain it in 2 ways.
Well, good for you.
So, how about that?
This is why you wrote this book, and I did not. I just read it and picked my jaw up off the floor.
So the one way that people can explain it, and it's a legitimate explanation, is confirmation bias. A lot of things happen, and some of those things at some point will match up with something that you dreamt, and you're only going to write about it and tell people about it if it's really remarkable.
6 times? 6 things?
Yeah, maybe. No, I'm just saying that's one explanation. And frankly, if you think about statistics, there's 1 chance in maybe a million, but like, how many dreams do people have?
All you need is one.
Right, exactly. So it's like winning the lottery, right? 1 chance in however many. So that's confirmation bias is one way to explain it. And the reason
that's not as sexy as the other explanation.
No, it's not. But the reason we do experiments in the lab or online using controlled methods is to show that statistically significantly over and over again, you could show precognition is a real effect and it's not confirmation bias. But in terms of spontaneous precognition like that, it's really hard to say that any particular case wasn't just a coincidence, right? So what I think is a better explanation based on the fact that you can do controlled experiments in the lab and show that this stuff isn't a coincidence because you're controlling the stimuli and you still see the relationship. The other explanation is that in some way that we don't understand yet, but that is real, information in the future is leaking back in time.
That's it.
And right. And if you're thinking about time as this, this loaf of bread, why couldn't there be a rule in the universe that, like, if this one gets moldy in the future, the mold can maybe travel back and get this one moldy in the past? I mean, right? Especially if it's something that's really powerful, like mold. Like 9/11, there were thousands of premonitions about 9/11 that are really compelling, especially from people who didn't get killed at 9/11. And some of them that saved their life, whether that would be true in other cases, I don't know, right? There's this wonderful book, Premonitions Bureau, speaking all
I've read it, yeah.
Yeah, speaking all to these kind of things. And he sort of acts like, I wrote a review of that book. My big complaint was he acts like modern science doesn't exist and we can't possibly do the experiment, which is so bizarre.
Modern science really gets in the way of a lot of his ideas.
Well, a lot of his ideas it's all confirmation bias. And he sort of wants to poo-poo the whole thing. But what I took out of it is, if we wanted to make a premonitions bureau where people would actually assess skilled intuitives or skilled precogs, something like Minority Report, if we wanted to create something like that, he was showing us how not to do it.
Well, and the fact is, once we're in this realm, we might as well talk about it. And you mention it in a very special box in the book. If you are a person who's mentally ill or has a family history of mental illness, or you're living in a cultural environment where this is not accepted or this is denigrated, you have to be really, really careful about your precognitive statements because it can arouse confusion, suspicion. In many cases, you may be hospitalized if you are a person who's in a position to be involuntarily hospitalized. And the Premonitions Bureau, many of the people who were predicting horrendous disasters were people who otherwise were diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic and were typically heavily medicated to stop those visions from happening. But what we know from psychedelic experiences, from deep meditation experiences, from near-death experiences, we know that when the thalamus stops filtering, what you get is what many say is the fabric of our existence, literally a piece of fabric on which we are that ball bearing, right? And we're all just sort of like floating in it. And sometimes, since I met Thomas Campbell and we had him on the podcast and I a little bit fell in love with his brain, you know, sometimes when I'm scared or when I'm sad, I just think like it's just zeros and ones.
Yeah, there's informational substrate. Here we go.
It's just like, oh my God, that hurts so bad. And like, I'm crying, but I'm just like floating and like, there's trucks and car, like we live in a city, right? Like you can sort of like do that telescoping. But for people who have access to these kinds of premonitions, it's dangerous. It can be perceived as very dangerous.
Blowing that up a little bit, any kind of psychic capacity where you can get information about things. Because if you're precognitive, you could also get information about things you're not supposed to know about.
That's Jonathan's favorite kind of information to tell me about when he wakes up in the morning.
What do you mean you're not supposed to know about it? Why are you getting it if you're not supposed to know?
Because it's out there. You can't help it.
I don't mean supposed to know from a universal or consciousness or informational substrate sense. I mean, like, we have classified information in our country, and other countries have classified information. And some remote viewers are gifted enough to get that classified information without clearance.
This never occurred to me.
I mean, it's in the news a lot right now because of the feud between Trump and Elon Musk, whether or not Jeffrey Epstein really killed himself. And there's this information back and forth. So you're saying that type of classified information a remote viewer may be able to just get the answer to. Now, how they verify that as true or not is another question.
Well, right. There's different kinds of classified information. Some kind of classified information is information that some people know, and only those people are supposed to know, and other people don't. And there's other information about what is not known. Like, right? Like it's classified that we don't know, blah, 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 right? That our ignorance is classified. But regardless, so for instance, remote viewing, a friend of mine, John Vivanco, and his partner, Prue Calabrese, were two of the first remote viewers to get an actual consulting job going. And they were supported largely by three-letter agencies. FBI came to them after 9/11 and said, we don't know anyone who can tell us using any kind of technique whether the foundation under the World Trade Center towers has been cracked. Can you guys look with your psychics?
No.
Yes, true. And and he's like, sure. And they looked and they said, it looks intact. And they said, thank you very much. So
was it intact?
Yeah.
Okay, but in this case, we had a 50% chance of being right.
100%.
This is like, is it a boy or a girl?
Yeah,
like,
right,
you know?
Exactly. Our intelligence agencies have continued to work with, whether pro bono or otherwise, with remote viewers on various projects. There's a love-hate relationship here, and that's why I bring up the Virginia thing. There was actually a case of another software engineer who said he dreamt of the lottery numbers. And there's a part of me that says, are they saying this, or have they invented a way to look at the lottery numbers in the future? And they're like, I'm going to say I dreamt it. So anyway, they're in Virginia, they're hanging around, near NSA. Maybe that's happening. My point is that there's a whole world of secrets. The world is run on a lot of secrets. Forget governments. Forget classified information. You've got companies that do not want another company to know what their corporate, IP is, right? So there's danger, Will Robinson, when you realize this stuff is real.
Why isn't more leaked then? I mean, we had Angela Ford on. Like, I get it. I watched Wormwood. Like, I understand. I mean, it still kind of blows my mind that the government's like, we're going to teach you to look at things that aren't in the room because, like, the Russians figured out how to do this, and so did mystics. But why isn't more leaked? Like, if I could do this, I'd spend all my time doing this.
That's why we were not going to let you take her class.
See, the thing is, you don't know if you're working for, let's say you have a contract for the FBI to look at the foundation. You're not allowed to tell that thing to anyone until like 20 years later. And then you have permission to say, yeah, we did that.
I'd be a whistleblower. I'd be like, there's aliens. They're living in the White House. Donald Trump is an alien.
If you don't have a security clearance, you're not told whether you're right or wrong. You're told thank you. Thank you for the information. Period. So you can't leak anything because you don't know if it was thank you for the information because secretly we were trying to test.
I would leak it all.
Right? It could be like secretly.
Leak it all.
Right. Except it could be like, we're testing to see if you're any good. Oh, it turns out you're not any good. Thank you.
Are there groups of remote viewers working on corporate espionage right now?
I think, yeah, sure, unethical ones. I mean, there's the remote viewers that I train and people I've trained with would, part of their deal is like, I don't do corporate espionage. I don't leak classified secrets. I don't, if I don't have a security clearance, I don't look at anything that's I mean, there's a whole set of ethics that ethical remote viewers hold. And then there's a different set of ethics that unethical remote viewers
Yeah, I was going to say, if there's like eco-terrorists, why can't there be remote viewer terrorists who are like, I'm going to reveal everything?
Not speaking of your school of remote viewers, but knowing that this training is out there, I would imagine that there are black hat remote viewers that are out there just trying to gather as much information as they can about anything. So if you have patents on a specific technology, there may be remote viewers out there trying to access that.
And it becomes relevant. How do you protect something from remote viewing?
That's a question for you.
Well, that's not something I could speak to.
Like, do you put crystals around it? Like, you put it in a specific vault? Like, is it even possible?
I tell you a publicly known way. Lynn Buchanan teaches about this. A publicly known way to distract remote viewers is to put whatever it is of interest near something that's of more interest.
That's what all politicians do. Like, oh, you're looking at the war that I started in a country far off. Well, there's aliens.
Right, exactly. So if you have a really secret document, storing it next to something that you kind of don't care that gets out but is more juicy is not a bad thing. Also, like apparently there's a story about Joe McMoneagle talks about this. Also, Lynn Buchanan, that in the Russian embassy they would have one of the layers of the building would have prostitutes just hanging out, and like remote viewers would just be like, "There's prostitutes here." I don't know, like that's where they would go because they were mostly men. So it's a good distraction.
So having your remote viewers be female or gay men is an advantage if you want to avoid the prostitutes.
Well, having your remote viewers not be known, their personalities and characteristics not be known to the adversary, it would be even better. Because if you know what would distract someone or attract their attention, then that's helpful.
There's many, many really fantastic examples in the book, and also a really detailed, kind of analysis of what it means to think about dreams this way, to think about precognitive events this way. Some of the issues that I wanted to bring up, which I'd love for you to speak to, there's something about when people, let's say, indicate they've had a precognitive dream that, told them not to take a train the next day.
Yeah.
And they normally would take the train, but instead they walked. And this happened a lot around 9/11 as well.
Yes.
Of the people who were like, I knew not to go to work that day. How do we sort of reconcile? I'm going to go ahead and say it. How does the God of our understanding, right, hold all of this possibility in the world when one person says, my life was saved because of my precognitive dream, but a dog could die and I would feel like, oh my gosh, how dare I, right? Thousands of people can die and you have this one person like, well, I had a dream not to go to work. How do we wrap our heads around the universe that holds both of those experiences?
That's such an important question. And often I get people who are distraught because, when I say I mean they contact me, who are distraught because they either think that they have just learned from our book, that they should learn precognition to save their life, and that they had lost a child or something and they didn't know it, and was it their fault that they didn't learn? And like, oh my gosh, there's so many things you can't control in this. And then the other side is people who have had a traumatic brain injury or were born this way, where they have incredible precognition constantly and they want it to stop because they feel a responsibility. And so far they haven't been able to change anything. Like, so the person has an accident, it's not the exact same as they saw, it's a different accident, but so there's sort of like inevitability thing. And I think the way that we have to recognize it is that it's not the God of our understanding. I mean, it's the God of we have to have a God of a different understanding. I mean, that God cannot share our understanding, because our understanding is this earthly, human understanding. And if your God is kind of like you, except kind of bigger and more powerful, then like, it doesn't make any sense that, all those people would die. Some of them probably had precognitions and were like, whatever, I'm going to work. It's not like they're better because they just forged ahead, or they're worse because they didn't listen to their precognition, or someone who didn't have there's just no, that kind of human personality, body-based scarcity thinking, when we project it onto God, fails. And so when people talk about the God of their understanding, I understand that from like my life in 12-step groups. It's like the idea is this God of your connection to this higher power, whatever it is, right? And I like that openness. But I really think it's not helpful if it's of your understanding, because that doesn't lift you up. It has to be bigger than your understanding and better than your understanding. So I think that's the leap of faith, is recognizing that there's lots of things we don't understand, and yet there's some kind of a plan, and we're living on the wrong side of the quilt. There's this intricate, beautiful quilt that if we were able to get to the other side, we could see, oh, that's why that person had to die, and that's why this, da 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 da. But we're living on the side with all the knots and all the things going weird places that don't make any sense. At some point, when we get to a self-transcendent place, that when we die, or before we're born, or when we're looking at things from this other point of view, we can see the other side of the quilt, and we can say, I get it. I just didn't know the plan, and the plan was way too complex for my little human brain.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. But I think we can say that the plan is not simple, and I think we can say we are not God. I mean, sort of, I feel like those are the two for sure things. Is like a friend of mine said, "There's the things I'm sure of. There is a God, and it's not me." And I like that.
Jonathan had a recurring dream that he often talks about. And he dreamt, I will let Jonathan tell it, and then I will give my cynical analysis as needed.
Yes.
But go ahead, Jonathan.
Great, let's hear this.
I had a recurring dream 3 to 5 nights a week. So it's only my personal experience, and therefore it's not a scientific study, and we could dismiss it outright. However, my personal experience was that for more than a year, I was in my last year of university. It was before my son was conceived. I know when he was conceived. And I had this dream constantly about being in a very specific location on a road trip in the car we owned at the time. We pulled up next to a river underneath a tree, and my then wife and I were in conflict. And it was like, the feeling of it was very clear. And we pull up in this town and we say, let's rest here for a while. And we get out of the car and we look around, and the downtown has a very specific design to it. There's a river running through, there's the shade of the tree, and we agree to rest here for a while. After my son is conceived, we move towns. I don't have that dream again until 8 years later. I don't remember, it doesn't come back to me. 8 years later, I find myself walking downtown in a town I've never been in before, and my life has had many unexpected twists and turns to find myself in that town. Enormous amount of conflict with my son's mom about where we should live. I'm in Toronto at the time. They've moved to this town, and she and I are in conflict of whether or not she's going to stay there. I walk downtown and it hits me. The design of the town, a river running through the downtown. There's the bridge. like the shape of the downtown, which has a courtyard and Western style buildings that look like the Old West. And all of a sudden that dream comes back to me, and I'm struck with all the times I've had that dream. And what hits me is a level of divine perfection that we are in this town at this moment. And all the panic and terror that I feel about we shouldn't be here, and why have you moved here, and you can't be here, and I'm in Toronto and he's here and I need access to my son, all of that quiets and settles for a moment. And within the next couple of days, or I don't know how long, maybe a week, I get really clear that I'm leaving Toronto, I'm coming here, we're going to be living in this town. And for the next 4 years, we live in this town, we sort out our divorce, we sort out our custody of our kid. And we do. We rest here for a while. We don't end up staying there, but we rested there for a while. And it was a very, profound experience that it felt like to me that some version of me was leaking information from the future back to me in a time that my life was going to get pretty wild and unexpected once we had my son and go into that adventure of having a kid together.
Okay, let's hear the cynical take. I have a hopeful take.
No, I think there's a lot of beauty to it. I think there's a lot of meaning to it, and I would never take that away from anyone. But
however,
when I think about, for example, déjà vu, and what we know from some of the really interesting studies of déjà vu, is that the literal mechanisms of déjà vu creates this scenario of complete embodiment. The gestalt, right? The whole thing has been lived. It's been experienced. It's as true as if it happened. And so for me, I wonder if there are also components of these kinds of experiences that we have, that a certain pathway, a certain groove, right, gets activated, and we're down that groove with all of the input, right, that exists around it. And in addition is, and for me as a scientist, a really unidentifiable component of I've been here before. Mm-hmm. This is exactly it. And if I'm being, I don't want to say cynical, but if I'm being clinical about it, right, there are many aspects of this. And, we've talked about the telepathy tapes till we're blue in the face, because there's a certain component of what is that for Jonathan might need absolutely no explanation. He doesn't want to hear that kind of analysis. And for me, I'm kind of all about, what is it? What is it with the capital I?
So my interpretation is it's a mix of déjà vu, precognitive dream, and the healing loop, time travel therapy. I think that your moment, feeling that, oh my God, this is the knowing, that's the déjà vu moment. I do believe that you had that experience as a recurrent dream, just because it was so strong to you that it was recurrent. If it was just one dream, I would be doubtful, but recurrent is different. And then that you had this healing, it actually calmed your anxiety, and you said, okay, whoa, I'm looking at the quilt from the other side, and this is going to be okay, and I can actually rest here and follow the instructions in the dream. What a gift. So that's this healing time loop, which I think is a fascinating, it's like compendium of all that we've been talking about. So that's beautiful.
I love that interpretation. And one of the things that was frustrating for me about the book was that I don't have any such interesting dreams. I have crazy dreams that I promise will never come true. Like, there's not a future reality where any of these things are happening. There's a lot of trauma and violence, a lot of cognition separate from precognition. Yeah. I often will speak my non-native tongue in my sleep, which is that's a large computation for me. I'm not super fluent in Spanish or Hebrew, but I will speak them in my dream. That's too much work for the brain.
100%.
So I just don't have access, to these kinds of things. So I'm very curious, and I haven't tried, but I'm very curious to try some of the, the techniques. You have a 6-step, set of it's an exercise that, can start training this kind of component. And I wonder if you can speak, a little bit to what is it to try and hone these abilities? Is it getting in touch with intuition? Is it more than that? Is it less than that? And if this is a skill set that I can try and acquire, it would also make sense that there are certain brains that are born and gifted with this ability, so that when Jonathan says he like deeply knows something, he feels it in his body. And I'm like, I'm only thinking about things all day, every day.
What is it?
Like, it doesn't drop. Like, whatever the shortest distance, the longest emotional distance, I don't travel it. It just, it's like my neck is made to keep the feelings from coming, to the thoughts. So can you talk a little bit about what this training is?
Maybe that's why your shoulders are so tight.
Well, okay, you say that. I'm just going to challenge your statement and work backwards. You say that, but you also host this podcast that like brings in spirituality and science, and spirituality is all about experience and the knowingness and that what we can't think about, but that ends up having a massive effect on who we are. And so I don't buy into it. I do see that you're very cognitively focused.
Well, and even Jewish mysticism is very, very cognitive.
Oh my God, you can't read any of that stuff. The Zohar is like insane.
Right. The best Kabbalistic texts are translated by a physicist, Arya Kaplan. So it's like very cognitive. Yeah.
Exactly. And speaking of the Jewish, that's the other reason I don't buy it, is in the Jewish culture, we have this soul piece that doesn't go away. And that's the self-transcendent sort of, there's something about that has to do with love, that has to do with this golden thread, the self-transcendence. I'm not saying only Jews have that, but I'm saying like you have that too. And that's what draws you to this work. So I'm just not buying the I'm a head on a stick argument, just not buying it. And then the other thing is, but people who do have, so backing into your dream experience, people who do have like violent dreams or like thinky dreams. I have thinky dreams, especially when I'm working on a paper or something, because I'm in that mode, right? It really helps to just make yourself write down your dreams every morning, notebook by the bed. And if you don't have any dreams, or you consider them not worth writing down, first of all, especially write down the ones that are not worth writing down, because that's BS. And third, write down, I don't remember my dreams from last night yet. And then write about some other things. I've been feeling sad lately, that blah, blah, blah. And I wonder about today. It seems super busy, blah, blah, blah. Write down some other things. And sometimes the dream will just pop in your head. Because now you're basically telling your brain, I'm going to be writing anyway.
When I started a deeper, more, I'd say, meaningful meditation practice, I would start remembering dreams that I had remembered in the morning and then I forgot. And when I'd get into that theta state, right, you're starting to approach that theta state, it was like things started coming in. I'd say in my 49 years that I've been alive, that was likely the first time that I truly understood this place, right? This place that exists, that if when my brain waves get into this state, I start remembering things that only came to me when I was dreaming, right? I'm going the place that Thomas Campbell went the first time he tried TM, and 20 minutes later was like, what the fuck, right? Like, I've never had a Thomas Campbell experience, but that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, state-dependent memory. And so you're trying to get your brain to stay in that state or come back to that state by putting everything down. And you're also teaching your brain this matters to you. My dreams matter to me. And so it's going to be more interested in reporting them if it matters to you. But the other thing I want to say is, you said, is it only intuition? Is it expanding intuition? Is it more or less than intuition? And I think of intuition as an even bigger umbrella than precognition. Intuition includes expert intuition, like someone who's really good at something. You're an expert, in neuroscience. Yeah, you have expert intuition around that. Same with me, right? Jonathan, I don't know what your work was before this, but I bet you have expert intuition in that. What was your work?
Narrative, story, media creation.
Yes, clearly you have expert intuition in that, because you slowed me down when we first said, slow your roll, Mossbridge. And so we were like the expert intuition is part of intuition. Another part of intuition are all of these unconscious signals that we just don't even know about, but that are processed and that we use. Another part of intuition is precognition. Another part of intuition might be telepathy. Telepathic signals that we're not conscious we're getting. Another part of intuition could be clairvoyance, getting information just from the informational substrate of the universe. We might not be aware of it. Another kind of intuition is the intuition that you have when you're actually consciously processing things, and then you feed them back to your unconscious mind, and then they come out again as a surprise. So there's all these different kinds of intuition. And so if you're going to expand intuition, you can't lose. Because if you expand intuition, you're training everything. If you're not going to say, let's ignore psi abilities because they don't exist. If you just try to become more intuitive, and you, for instance, write down in a notebook all these intuitive hits you had, or you write down, or you do exercises with other people, like, let's see if I can tell you what might come out of your mouth, or whatever it is, or fun games like, I hear the phone ring and I don't have an individual ring for everyone. Who might this be? These kind of things are just letting yourself...
It's always my mother.
Right, well, you're a Jew. So letting yourself play with these things, and it really supports expanding your intuition without being biased about the source. The first question people used to ask me when I said I'm a scientist, cognitive neuroscience, I study intuition, specifically the ability to predict future events and what that has to do with our well-being and our sense of time. People go, oh, I've heard about that. Is everyone able to do that, or only some people? What's the population distribution of the ability? That's the number one question I get. And then the second one is, can it be trained? And the population distribution, I explain to them like music. So I say, about 5% of people are absolutely tone deaf. Maybe make 10% are absolutely tone deaf, have horrible rhythm. About 5 to 10% are musical geniuses. And the rest, basically everyone can hum a tune or they can sing happy birthday. They might not like it, but they can do it. I think it's exactly the same situation with psychic abilities. Well, at least with precognition, I would say it's probably exactly the same. And the difference is that if your kid hums a tune or sings happy birthday, you don't go, oh no, we have to send you to a psychologist, right? But if your kid goes, Mommy, I dreamt last night that you were going to fall down the hill, don't go outside. And the mom does whatever, and goes outside and breaks her leg falling down the hill. You're like, oh no, my kid needs to see a psychologist. Instead of like, oh, we have social norms and ways to support people who have this gift, right? So I think now that telepathy tapes has happened, people don't ask those questions. They say, does that have to do with what the kids in the telepathy tapes are doing? And I say, I think so. And actually the telepathy tapes people called me, and I've now been doing pro bono work. First I did some consulting work, and now I'm doing pro bono work as their human potential research lead for their film coming up, because I think telepathy and precognition are very related, and it's all about this unconditional love piece. It's all about not having these boundaries between people that we impose. Just like precognition and being good at precognition is about not having these boundaries between times that we impose. And so unconditional love helps with all of it. In fact, I have data showing that unconditional love, from 2 studies, showing that unconditional love, self-reported unconditional love, actually supports precognition. What I mean by that is people who were first asked, they were given a definition of unconditional love and then asked, to what extent do you feel this way? And those who felt high on the unconditional love scale, that was their own report, then did a precognition task, the same task that people who felt low on the scale did. But the ones who felt high were actually statistically significantly more accurate and above chance.
They're vibrating at a higher frequency, right? I mean, that's the...
Right, and they're dropping boundaries, or they're seeing things from the other side of the quilt, in a way, maybe. So yeah, so I think that answered some, if not all of those questions, but that's where I'm at.
So summarizing...
Good luck!
What you're saying is that everyone has the ability to have precognitive events. Everyone has the ability to see the future and get messages about the future, and everyone has the ability to increase their intuitive ability.
I would say 5 to 10% of people don't, but I would say 90% of people do.
And this is kind of a nice circle to where we started. I think it's extrasensory ability, and you're describing them as this is just part of our abilities. With our current senses, we're just not utilizing them.
Yeah, it's like the information's coming in our current senses. If you include knowing as a sense, which is more cognitive, I think, but if you include that as a sense or as a thought pattern or as a conclusion, then I would say, yes, it's our existing abilities. It's just the information's coming from the future. rather than the past.
I want to touch back, Julia, on what you were talking about in terms of our understanding of time, which is you said we don't understand that the past is not fixed, and we think that the future is unknowable. Expand on that. How is the past not fixed?
It's not that I understand time either, but I'm just saying there's some wiggle room in this idea. In physics and in neuroscience and in psychology, there's wiggle room. So let me just reiterate that I'm one of the people on the planet, like everyone else, who doesn't understand time. But the wiggle room is when you start to look at the relationship between what is perceived and what we know from physics must be true. If you don't believe in physics, then this argument doesn't make any sense. But if you believe in physics, let's start with perception. What is perceived is we really only see or hear or feel the now, right? So in the world of perception, it's all about the now, right? There's no other time that we're actually immediately perceiving. We can have memories, but we're still perceiving in the now, right? Or we could project ourselves forwards, but we're still, I know I'm still talking with you. So the now takes incredible precedence in the world of perception. And even, you stick an electrode in the brain and you're measuring responses to things that are happening now. They are tempered by things that happened in the past. And at least based on my work, I would argue that they're also tempered by things that will happen in the future that you can't predict from the past. But having said that, you're measuring the response in the now. Okay, so there's so much priority on the now in perception and in psychology and in neuroscience. Okay, in fact, almost defining what consciousness is about being present in the now. And altered states of consciousness affect where you are in the now. And so it's really tied into that. Okay, now go to physics and you find out because of relativity, particularly general relativity, that if someone's accelerating at a different rate than you, they're going to get essentially to the future faster, and you'll be in their past. And still things are going on in your now if you're a perceiving being and they're a perceiving being. And things are going on in their now, which means things are changing, things are having cause and effect, things are moving in the past and in the future, because there's not one past and one future. So that's like the Minkowski space-time block world type thing. So the big question is, how are we these beings who have this privileged spot in our point of view and it takes forever to figure out this is not actually representative of what's going on physically. And once you do figure it out, you kind of don't believe it. And then you can't figure out what the relationship is between this thing we're calling now and this whole space-time block, right? So that's the problem.
There's a lot in here. I'll earmark two areas to explore. First is that the past is not present, which I don't believe to be true. And we talk on the podcast about how we are interpreting the present so much through the past that it is actually very much present, and that the past is constantly with us to the point where it is actually obscuring the nature of our present reality.
I don't know that there is a present. Yeah, exactly. Like what are you even talking about? If it's a perceived experience, the present, then we're never perceiving it.
And then the second point, which I don't fully understand, is how can someone arrive at the future faster than someone else? But let's pause on that one for a second and just focus on the past being either present or with us. The idea from a psychological standpoint where people do child or parts work, where they go back and revisit a memory, they're going back and actually changing the meaning that they've made from a past experience, which will change how present that is, which will change how they are anticipating or making meaning of future events. Mayim can speak to it more eloquently, but is that somewhat what we're talking about when we talk about, the lack of there being a specific presence?
So now if we're talking about like internal family systems, or if you extrapolate that to like time travel narratives, which is which is how at least my team extrapolates that idea, that kind of mental time travel. Now we're talking about psychological uses of these constructs we build for ourselves in the past, present, and future, and how to relate to them and how they can help heal from trauma and stuff. Those are psychological constructs that may or may not have anything to do with like the physics of time, but it has a lot to do with human psychology. It's not the same, but it's, I guess, related to trying to trace out what is the actual relationship between what we call now, which I think we all agree kind of maybe doesn't exist, and this physical concept of time, especially given that people who are better physics interpreters than me, keep agreeing that the future has to exist because someone could get there before us. So I think it's all really interesting.
Explain to us how someone would get to the future before someone else. Because like in Marvel movies, there are multiple timelines, and people like the idea of the multiverse and that things are happening in parallel universes, and there's multiple versions of us. That's not what we're talking about. How would someone progress in time faster?
If someone's accelerating faster than you, and by faster than you, like, no one on the planet is really getting to the future faster than anyone else, because you have to go pretty close to the speed of light before it's even noticeable, right? But the fact that So basically, no one on the planet no human being on the planet is traveling close to the speed of light. Even someone who's just accelerating at a faster rate than your acceleration is essentially technically getting to the future faster than you.
What does it mean to accelerate faster than someone else?
It's like a physics conversation about like velocity is mass times acceleration, and it's how fast you move from one location to another. So it's not just speed.
Yeah, so speed is your rate of travel. Acceleration is like the second derivative. So the acceleration is the rate of your rate of travel. So I'm going at first 1 mile an hour, and then the next minute, because I'm starting up my car, I go 2 miles an hour, and then that's a really slow car. The next minute, I'm going 3 miles an hour because I'm putting along in a golf cart, apparently. So that's acceleration. And acceleration has a lot to do, acceleration and gravity, according to general relativity, are essentially the same thing. They're different expressions of the same thing. And they bend time. So the cool illustration of that from, I think Nova in the 70s, which is when I was a kid watching Nova, which was this cool TV show on PBS about science, was that you'd have this curved surface like a fabric, like the fabric of space-time, right? It was like a literal fabric. And in the center would be a mass, like a ball bearing. And it would show how that would curve the fabric from its mass, right? And so the ball bearing would make the space-time curve. It doesn't just curve space, it curves time. And so as a result, this is why Minkowski comes after Einstein. It sort of looks at what he's doing and says, well, gosh, this would mean that the future already has to exist in what we call the now. Because if someone's accelerating faster than us, they could get there. They can't just be blank. Just like we can't be blank here in the past as soon as someone else gets to their future, because then people would be popping in and out of existence, and things would be popping in and out of existence all the time, and that's not what we see. And that's where the idea of the block universe comes from, which is block universe is like a loaf of bread, and each slice of the bread, it's sliced bread, each slice of the bread is like a section of space-time. And nothing kind of changes until you get to the next slice. So it's like a snapshot of reality. So some person who's accelerating fast might be further down the bread slices than us. So there kind of has to be a loaf, because there's no point at which we understand that you might fall off except maybe around a black hole or something, or maybe that's what dark energy is or whatever. So these weird sort of boundary conditions that we don't understand well. So this is how we get to multiverses, because people really, really, really don't like the idea. My interpretation of why multiverses exist is people really, really, really don't like the idea of, well, everything else all decided, right? The future, predestination. The future is already essentially what they call superdetermined. And that is one interpretation of this idea of the bread slices in the Minkowski sort of block world of the space-time. There are other possible ways to think about it, but one way people have handled it is to say, well, what if that's true for one timeline, but in another timeline, other things are true? And what differentiates the timelines is what kind of choices you make. So if you make a choice to go through the left door in timeline A and the right door in timeline B, your whole future opens up in a different way, because when you went through the left, you met so-and-so and they changed your life. When you went through the right, you got in a car crash and that changed your life too. And so those are two different timelines. So that comes straight from a physics explanation from a guy named Everett, who talked about this many worlds hypothesis. Maybe there are many worlds. Yes, there's these space times, but they're sort of split off by choice. And so you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. Well, maybe so, right? So I'm not partial to that explanation because I find it super messy and just that's a lot of splitting off, because you make a choice with every breath you take and even every portion of every breath. But also, the universe could be messy. We don't really understand it.
The way that it was explained, or conceptualized, when I was studying physics from a quantum perspective is, if every electron has different spin possibilities, in theory, every kind of molecule of you, right, has a potential alter ego, right? And so this was sort of this notion of, and I think we talked about it with Thomas Campbell, we talked about it with Bruce Lipton, the notion is not, am I the president in another reality, right? But from the baseline that I begin with, from my foundation, there's a certain amount of limited but pretty close to infinite possibilities of different experiences, mind states, and really places that I exist in the universe. So this sort of like sliding doors notion, but to infinity or close to infinity.
And this comes to a spiritual sort of aesthetic notion that one of the things that is true about being in a body is that those decisions are made for you. I mean, part of the deal is that we have to kind of, I think, get over ourselves and the fact that this is what's true, at least in this reality, at least on this timeline. This is what we're working with. And while you could get really focused on, and I think sometimes people do get really focused on this idea of all these other possibilities and how can I control it? And if I control it the right way, maybe I go into this like manifestation of da-da-da-da-da, and it can become almost a fetish of control. And it feels to me like that's the not learning of what we are here to learn, which is, here's your body. Now let's see what happens.
Well, I mean, I think there's an entire industry, there's an entire consciousness, if you will, with a lowercase c, surrounding we are not confined to this body. We can access other states of consciousness. And obviously, people who have psychedelic experiences are tapping into that. People who have near-death experiences are tapping into that. And as a neuroscientist, I love to explain the chemistry of what's happening and the release of this, that, and the other. But there's definitely a knowing that some people are experiencing on a level that is not confined, let's say, to this body.
I am so glad you said that, because it never occurred to me that anything I would ever say in my lifetime would make people think I was a materialist. So let me be clear. I consider all of those things having to do with the body and not the body. But who you are, this idea of controlling sort of, I won the lottery because I controlled the choices that I made, and in this timeline I won the lottery with my skill at manifesting, is questionable to me as like a spiritual path, and it's questionable scientifically as well, because it feels like it's about ego. Like, look what I did, look what I can do, look what I can control. When it feels like all the journeying people do in psychedelics with people who have had near-death experiences, people who go into prayer for long periods of time or meditation, people have out-of-body experiences, people who work on psi like I do and try to train people to get better with their psi like I do. It seems to be very much about not the ego, not look at how I controlled, but more like, how can I become skillful using my body as a tool, as well as this larger consciousness with a capital C? How can I become skilled at making things better, which usually involves love, which usually involves connection, which usually involves active compassion. And so, absolutely not a materialist. I'm not saying you're stuck with your body and you can't get out of it. I'm saying your body is this tool to learn how to not be controlled by your ego and your desire for power.
We recently had a neurosurgeon and neuroscientist on, Dr. Jendiel. He recently wrote a book on dreams, and we were talking about nightmares. And, you know, one of his kind of strongest pieces of evidence regarding nightmares was that you have to tell children that was a nightmare, right? Like what you just experienced in this other state of your consciousness when you were night-night, that was called a nightmare, right? That's not real. The conversation that you're having, though, kind of takes away our ability to say, that was just a dream. It's not real. The potential for opening up a conversation about non-nightmares being in some ways real, right? Whatever realness we can get, kind of label them with. But what about nightmares? You know, there are people for whom we don't want to remember our dreams. They're horrible. And obviously that's a reflection of a lot of other things. I'm not saying that I'm, I mean, for me, if that's my precognitive view, we're all screwed. Like end of days.
I don't think so.
Like, if you've seen Lord of the Rings, like it's Mordor, like everything's on fire. What is it with nightmares in terms of precognition?
One of the studies that I think is most underappreciated in this area is a woman who did her dissertation in psychology on just interviewing people who consistently just say they report precognitive dreams. She's like, I'm not going to worry about whether it's real or not, or whether you wrote it down or not. You just report it. I want to know about your personality, etc. And also tell me about the dreams. And she did a phenomenological separation of dreams that were just their own dreams that were not precognitive versus their dreams that were precognitive. Because there is this question of, if you're precognizing future events, like, is it constantly having nightmares? My experience as someone who precognizes in dreams fairly regularly, and sometimes there are very negative events, matched what I read in that dissertation. And what I mean by that is my experience, I'll tell you my experience and then what is in that dissertation. My experience is that if I'm dreaming about a future event that's bad, it doesn't come off as a nightmare. It comes off almost as a matter-of-fact newsreel. Like, okay, so this bombing, and here's the location, and I'm like, ugh, this sucks, and it's like, yeah, this sucks, and this is what, this is what's going to happen, and this is what you can do about it, da, da, da. It's just like very, like, here's the situation, here's the information.
Have you had those?
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean, oh, yeah? Wait, hold on.
Well, that's why I'm so interested in this stuff, right?
So you've had dreams of like bad things that happened?
Yeah, and I've had nightmares. I've had more nightmares than dreams of bad things that happened, because I've had many dreams of good things that have happened. But with the bad things that happened, they're so different than nightmares, which I wake up feeling afraid, adrenalized, afraid. Those are psychological fear dreams. Those are like, I'm afraid of this part of my psyche. I'm afraid of this person. I'm afraid of what might happen. Those are very different from precognitive dreams. And that's what was found in the dissertation, too. The women would talk about, when I'm precognizing something that's going to happen, it's matter of fact. I don't wake up afraid. I wake up going, I got to write this down and see if there's something I could do about it, period. Like, this is a message. I'm receiving the message. That's the deal. Like, for instance, Jonathan, in your recurrent dream, were you afraid? What was your feeling about it? No, it was just like facts, right?
Yeah, it was just facts. And there was some relief when we got out of the car. there was like a tension in the car, and often we were in conflict. So I think it was bleeding over into dream. And then, there was tension in the car similar to waking life. And then we got out of the car, and then there was a bit of like a hesitant relaxation. Like it wasn't like everything is great, but it was like, oh, it's not as tense as it was in the car.
Yeah, right. So like I'll tell you my dream that is most known about, most public. Because I was asked to be on the Unexplained as an experiencer of precognition, and they didn't talk to me as an expert on precognition. Basically, that's why I tend not to talk about these in the same conversation, because people, if you're a scientist who studies precognition, they get freaked out if you also have precognitions, because then they think you're biased. But I'm sort of like, if I were an ethnomusicologist and I was like, didn't know how to play like at least one musical instrument, that would be really weird, right? So I sort of feel like that's just strange. I can actually be unbiased and do controlled research and still have experiences. And I don't know if any of them were precognitive because it's not a controlled experiment. But the experience that I had of this dream was the night before, and this was devastating because I couldn't do anything about it, but the night before the Kuwait bombing in the mosque during noontime prayers. I don't know if you remember that. It was July maybe 16th of a couple of years ago. I don't quite remember the date. So it was shown to me. I had a guide. Sometimes I have a guide in these precognitive dreams that's sort of like the newscaster who says this is what's happening. And just the bombing in this mosque that was partly outdoors, partly indoors. It was in the dream. I could see it was noon because of the position of the sun in the sky. I could see it was during prayers because of the bodies, where they were on their knees on rugs, and the dreamer person said it was in kyuk kyuk, kyuk kyuk, and I'm like, where's kyuk kyuk? And I write it, and I wake up and kyuk kyuk. Well, of course, later, I knew something would happen, but I didn't know where kyuk kyuk was. It sounded like an Inuit word. I was thinking Alaska, but like how many mosques are open air in noon in Alaska? Like 0. And so I'm like, that's not right. But there's nothing I could do about it. And I felt like alone in the information. I felt hopeless, but I also knew it would happen. And then later in that day, I saw Kuwait City, Kuwait, which, the initials would be Kyuk Kyuk. And in the dream, though, I took the moment, and I took advantage of the moment, and I asked the guide, why is this? He gave me a quiver with arrows in it. I said, why is this dream one of the arrows? Why should that be in my quiver? Like, first of all, I'm Jewish. Second of all, I don't know these people, and I can't do anything about it. And his answer was, you get born with the arrows in your quiver. You got no choice. Like, that's the situation. Those are the arrows in your quiver. It's impossible for me to explain to you the relationship.
Because that is a question, is like, why have this information? What good does it do to serve you this piece of knowledge when you can't influence it? Is it merely so that you'll talk about it and prove that consciousness is not the limited material experience that many people believe? Like, what's the point?
Maybe. My husband calls it a free sample. Maybe it's a free sample. Maybe it's to make me have the feeling I had after that. That was my very first dream of a bad world event that was so clear that I was convinced, like, okay, I didn't know what to do about. So it did make me say after that, if something like this happens again, I don't care how foolish I feel, I'm going to call some kind of an authority and tell them about it. And so I had another dream like that. I did call an authority, anti-terrorism task force guy in San Diego, who I ended up working with after that on various projects, because he ended up acting on some of the information. I can't really go into detail, but he wasn't paying me or anything. It was just experimental work together to try to see what we could do with the kind of information that would come. So maybe it was to avoid things that I don't even know about.
Well, and I don't mean to answer for you, but my answer would be that's not how it works. Meaning, if you have an opening, if you have this ability, it's out there. There's not necessarily, it's a very kind of, it's a very bottom up, kind of approach to say, like, what power in the universe would tell Julia this but she can't do anything about it. That's not how the universe works. It's information and it's open to certain people, and it's not something like, why is she burdened with it? It's about her larger ability.
Maybe. And maybe maybe the universe is very personal. I mean, so that I go back and forth all the time on this. I totally agree with what you just said. And also it sometimes feels like, no, it's a plan. I don't get to know the plan looks like chaos. The plan looks like happenstance. The plan looks like not a plan to us. So it might as well be a bottom-up universe to us.
And to confirm, there are anti-terrorism task forces utilizing this information to try and prevent instances in real life.
I would say that is in the past. My colleague has since retired, and I don't think I was the only one. But I can only speak to what I know. There should be. Let's just say that.
Well, I think it's very interesting because we know of the military use of remote viewing and the programs. So to think that, why wouldn't it be used for anti-terrorism task forces? They're also trying to get that same level of intelligence. And if the future is knowable and people are getting these clues, I think the risk is obviously false positives and the resources required to find out what's going to happen and, how chase down all these leads. But if there are people who are more accurate in getting information, then of course.
Yes, I've always wanted to make like a 4D map of that, like a Google map, but that includes the future, and the sort of color of an area would be rated on like skilled vetted psychics who have been right in the past and their intuitions about that particular area, so that you could say, I'm going to travel to Greece in this time, and wait, it's red 2 weeks from now. That's interesting. That would be really cool. So it does seem like the only risk is, false alarms, but that's not necessarily the case. There could be a couple other risks. And I think that's why you don't hear about this a lot. So one other risk is you train a group of people to do this, and then they think they're amazing, and they go off on their own and like join an adversary or something, right? So that's a risk. Another risk is we don't understand the space-time continuum, and we don't understand conservation of information. And could it be that if you get some amount of information from the future, now you have less amount of information somewhere else that you can get? Maybe there's a conservation thing. Maybe by looking at something, you can cause it to happen. Maybe if you looked at something erroneously and saw something that wasn't going to happen, now it actually shifts things so that it does happen because you imagined it into being, because you were in that state. So it feels like there shouldn't be any problem with it. It feels just like it's just taking a video camera and looking at something. But there's these follow-on concerns that anyone who starts realizing how real this is can start to have. And so I think it has to be done super carefully and conscientiously. And if it's not being done that way, I think that could lead to some trouble.
I mean, these are fascinating concerns. And anyone who, when you talk about seeing the potential future, they say, well, is it real future or is it potential future? And where does human agency come into the mix? How much is predetermined?
Amen.
Kind of want to ask a big question. And it does tie into telepathy tapes, and it ties into, I think, everything we've spoken about. What is death? What do you view death as?
Just a quick answer.
An easy one. No, but I'm asking for you to put it in the framework of what we're talking about in terms of a future, in terms of a consciousness. What is your kind of understanding of what happens in that next iteration of our existence?
Okay, here's my deal. This is my aesthetic understanding, not based on science. And then I'll tell you the portion that's based on science. But most of it is just what makes me happy to think it's how it works and what feels like a good art piece. If the universe was an art piece. I'm 100% sure that the body dies, in that the body stops, all the traces of life stop in death. So like that part feels scientifically clear. I'd say I'm 90% sure that there's something that doesn't die that's associated with the person. I'd be like 90% sure, and that's based on near-death experiences, and it's based on mediumship, like good controlled mediumship studies. What I imagine is happening is at the moment of death, when people are having that life review that they talk about, they're actually present throughout the space-time continuum and available for an infinite amount of time for connection with people they love. So they're still present, like in that bread box or in that loaf of bread. They're still present in each of those slices. Those slices become the now for them. So the life review is easy. You're really in it. Those things are really there, like you're really real. And so when people are connecting with their loved ones after their loved ones died, what they're connecting with is that presence that was able to be in all of those times at once. And that is not a human thing. That's the thing that came into the human. That's like a soul. And so I would call that thing that's able to be in this whole loaf of bread the soul, the continuous sort of necklace on which each event of life exists. And this necklace that strings them all together, it's not about memory. It's about reality. These things really happened when I was in the body. And this really became, they all happened to this body that was connected to this soul. At some point, the soul then continues on without being connected to that body. In the same way, I would suggest that during life, the soul wasn't always connected to the body. Like people go traveling. I think skilled dreamers, maybe you, Mayim, go traveling into other people's bodies at night, and have different experiences. And so I think that's not so different. And so now it's around, and it could maybe come into another baby. It could go into a tree. I think it could go into the non-space-time continuum and go outside of space-time. So not in this 3D or 4D reality. It could go back to the informational substrate. And I kind of like to think of it like when we think about bodhisattvas who choose to come back, and then those who don't, who just get to graduate and like never have to come back, and aren't they lucky? I think of them as their souls going into the soup, like the informational substrate, and like the little piece of them is a potato and a little piece is a carrot, and someone else gets a scoop of soup into their body, and now you got a little bit of John F. Kennedy and a little bit of whomever. You know?
I'd like a little bit of John F. Kennedy Jr., please. But
yeah. But that's the aesthetic thing, and I hope it didn't freak you out by talking about going into other people's bodies when you dream. But the fact that you're speaking Hebrew, my question for you is always going to be, are you yourself all the time when you're dreaming?
I mean, sometimes I wonder if I'm myself when I'm not dreaming.
Yeah, that's also a good point.
I was going to ask, I mean, even separate from your connection to Kai and the telepathy tapes, I'm curious, you know, in the telepathy tapes when, I'm going to say supposedly, because in my opinion, in my very, very gentle and loving and supportive opinion, none of that information really was kind of codified, or, you know, there's not really a way to sort of quantify.
Oh, it's a podcast. You can't really do science on a podcast.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So when people report, you know, that there is this place, this hill, right, where everything kind of is existing, you know, is it possible that that's exactly the kind of place we're talking about, right? The place where all souls exist, right, throughout time and space.
You know, maybe, although I do get the impression that non-speakers have their own place where like non-speakers go to talk with each other. Like it seems like a special place for them to because they have such different experience than speakers, right? So maybe there's a place like that, but there's different subsets of the hill for people with different experiences. It reminds me a lot of, I mean, the Jews have a hill, right? We have Mount Sinai. And I converted to Judaism, and when I converted, I was told,
welcome, we're a real hoot.
Yeah, I know. Someone told me, thanks for converting, we need the height. Because I'm 6 feet tall. So anyway, but the rabbis were telling me, so now that you've converted, you were always at Mount Sinai.
Correct.
And so that is an example of exactly what we're talking about.
Yes. Your
soul was always at Mount Sinai. So it was always known that I would convert.
It's funny because, you know, there's certain mystical concepts that, you know, I was not necessarily raised with, but when I, took on more observance and started studying started studying the mystical texts, but also the traditional texts, like, that's something that people always point to, like, well, religion is crazy. It believes all these crazy things. And believe me, I'm the first to be like, yeah, like, I don't believe donkeys talk. And there's all sorts of metaphor, throughout the Old Testament. One of my interests in Christianity is the literalism with which it's been interpreted, and Brian Murarescu talks about this, and we talked about it with him. Anyway, but yeah, that notion that like we collectively existed somewhere is such a vast mystical notion that we're very uncomfortable, kind of talking about in a material sense, but it's completely a comforting thing and, part of a liturgy.
It is. And it's just for Jews, kind of like the non-speakers hill is just for non-speakers. And so it's like, it's not about segregation. It's more like to have this special place. If you're going to be a Jew and go through all of that, it's good to have a special place.
Yeah. And every culture has its own narrative, but it is very interesting that that is, a specific mystical component of ours. You were there too, Jonathan.
Do we want to just touch briefly on what it means to travel into someone else's body while we're dreaming and not just like communicate with other people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not saying that that's scientific. Like, it's very hard to scientifically test that. I'm just saying that it's interesting to me that I and other people I know other people I've talked to about dreams have had this experience of sometimes I'm myself and I have my own history and I'm like, oh, there's my partner over there. And it's a dream about like things I know from this life. And sometimes I appear to be someone else with a whole different back history, a whole different set of friends. Like you'll see a friend and in the dream, that person was a good friend. But you don't know that. When you wake up, you're like, I don't know that person. That person was a good friend in the dream, So that could just be the brain trying on different roles, and absolutely very interesting way to do role playing and modeling of relationship. Or it could be, consciousness separating from the body, or the soul separating from the body, going into someone else's body and trying that on for size and seeing what that's like.
You mean like in a dream where you're like, it was me, but it wasn't me, right?
Yeah. So it's always first person, but then like the history could be really different and the desires or way of doing things could be really different. So I think we just don't know. If you don't assume that consciousness has to be tied to your brain all the time, then these opportunities open up also for, speaking of telepathy tapes, also for understanding autism, for understanding a lot of the dementias. Could it be that consciousness is spending more time out of the body? And there's some evidence from people who do weird things like hunt ghosts, that some ghosts are from living people who are in states of dementia where they're just not conscious a lot of the time.
If anyone asks me what it was like to talk to you, every time you open your mouth, like a dozen amazing things come out that I want to do a separate 2-hour conversation with you about.
Next episode...
The ghosts of dementia. Like what?
Send their soul to become ghosts.
Well, the book, The Premonition Code, I highly recommend. The Science of Precognition. I really, really loved it. And I'm excited to try some of the exercises and see if I can figure out not only whose body I'm traveling into when I dream, but whose body I'm in when I'm awake. Julia Mossbridge, such a pleasure to talk to you. And we wish you only good things, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I feel a little like I need a nap after talking to Dr. Mossbridge. There's not a thing that she can't talk about that doesn't make it sound like amazing, cool, fascinating, weird, like spiritual, but also scientific. I wish she had done the telepathy tapes.
I'm afraid for you to go to sleep because I don't know whose body you're going to end up in.
Look, speaking my non-native tongue, I didn't think of it as inhabiting a different body, but it certainly feels like inhabiting a different consciousness. It's a consciousness that doesn't even speak the language that I was raised to speak.
This never really occurred to me, but I have had dreams where it feels like I'm a slightly different version of myself.
Yeah, like it was me, but it wasn't me. Or it's like, it was a man, but I'm certain it was me.
No, that I've never had.
Okay,
I don't want to make it
Never
weird.
mind. What, you can dream. I'm sure you've had dreams where you're like, I'm an elephant. That's normal, but it's me.
I like the idea of accessing more information though, right? It's like starting to write down your dream and saying, I haven't dreamt it yet.
Well, right. I mean, or I don't remember my dreams yet. It's kind of like she's sort of like the love child between Thomas Campbell and Bruce Lipton and like Buddha. No, because there's this like notion of like love as the literal frequency that, you know, kind of like really for everything we talked about, that's like her overarching principle. Like she's not a person you can really talk to in one episode. Like I don't even understand. Like she's her own universe. And this book is really, really great, but like it doesn't even scratch the surface of the things that she can talk about, understand, and contemplate. She's 6 feet tall. That's pretty cool.
Maybe over on Substack, where the Breaker community is deep diving into all the episodes and we're doing practices. Let's start a dream practice where people start a dream journal and they say, if they haven't remembered their dream, I haven't remembered it yet, and see if we can increase the psychic ability of the entire Breaker community. So if you want to be a part of it, come over, join us on Substack.
It's funny. I don't consider this a premonition. It's not precognition, but, and by the time people hear this, this will be months past. I was thinking, we were trying to think of a live to do, like a new live to do for Substack. And I had this real pull that we're supposed to do a live about God. And I was like, that's weird because like, I don't know. It's not something we normally like, talk about. Right. I was like, what's the take? But then after this episode today, I'm like, I think that might be kind of an opening in terms of like love and that frequency and what people experience when they have near-death experiences or when they have, you know, psychedelic experiences or when they like meet God on an acid trip. Like, I don't know. I think there's something there. And there's also several Black Mirror episodes I'm thinking of about it. That should be a bingo game. Which Black Mirror episode do we reference?
I'm speechless. I'm overwhelmed. We could go on. And what's going to happen is that this is going to marinate a little bit. Okay. And once it marinates, you and I are going to get on a live and we're going to have so many more like thoughts about this because there's endless ideas to tackle and they overlap with so many of our other podcasts. Thomas Campbell, yes, but Elizabeth Crone, when she said that reality and time was like a layer cake that you could slice into it, she talks about the loaf of bread. I think we should pause here. Let's pause here. Let's continue the conversation on Substack. This was great.
From our breakdown to the one we hope you never have, we'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, and now she's gonna break down